Hello everyone, we've got our panels ready to go, we've got them animated. Now let's go ahead and make the system where we can call these things to show up. So let's go ahead and come into our scripts. Inside of core, I've gone ahead and made a new folder called menus. And inside of menu, we're going to make this system. So first of all, let's make the system that's going to handle these menus. So we'll call this the VN menu manager. And this is going to handle all of the menus inside of the visual novel. Not necessarily the main menu, that'll be a different system, but this will handle the menus inside of the game. Then we're also going to want a new folder in here, which will be for our pages. Now, for each of these pages, they may have some different logic that they can run, such as our config menu will have its own little ways to set values, and our save and load menu will have its own functions to load up files and what have you. Those are going to be different types of scripts, and they'll be pages. So let's go ahead and create a new C# script, and this will be called a menu page. So I'm going to remove start and update off of this and make a new public void called open and close. The menus also need that animator linked. So public animator anim. Actually, that doesn't need to be public. We can make that private, and we can just serialize it. And what open is going to do for each of these things is we can have some different logic for them. So let's say that the save and load menu is going to do something different from the config menu on start. If we want to override it, then we need to make sure that this is virtual. So we'll set both of these functions to virtual, and then every class can have their own type of this. But what they may all do is they will have anim.setTrigger, and they're going to set the trigger to open it, which I called just open. So public constant string, actually private. I always want to make things public for some reason. And I'll call it open, which is going to equal just the name of the trigger that I set up in the animation. So that's open. So we set the trigger of open to reveal the panel. And if we close it, then we set the trigger of close. Easy enough, as long as I define what close is. So close with a S will just be close. And as long as that matches up with my trigger names, we're good. Now, inside of the VN menu manager, we need a list of the pages that we're going to use. So I'll have a serialized field, private menu page array for our pages. And I also want the root object. The root object controls the visibility of everything overall, as well as the interactability of it. And this includes our background panel as well. So we want that to fade in and out when we reveal the pages. So let's go ahead and make serialized field private canvas group, and this is going to be our root. Again, that root is right under menus, which is this canvas group, and we can use that to fade in and out our menu system with the backgrounds and the main buttons. To make it easy to fade in and out, let's make a canvas group controller that's going to handle that for us. So private canvas group controller, root CG. On start, root CG is going to equal a new canvas group controller. And we're going to make this what runs the coroutines that handle the alpha and opacity, and pass in the root as the canvas group you want to control. I'm going to remove update because we don't need that, but what I will do is I'll go ahead and I will make sure that I have some different logic set up to open the different pages. So in my menu manager, I'm going to have a public void which is going to open the save panel, or open the save page. And then I'm also going to have a public void which is going to open the load page. Save and load are both off of the same panel, but they'll have different settings, so I'm going to give them different functions. And I also want the config page, so public void open config page, and public void open help page. Now, since my pages are in an array, I'm going to need a way to identify one page from the other and figure out what it is I'm looking for. So in the menu page, I'm also going to come here and I'm going to make an enumerator which will define what type of page this is. So public enum type, or page type, is going to be of the type save and load, config, and help, which are the 3 pages that I've set up so far. So in the menu manager, if I go to open any of these pages, I'm going to reference that type and then get the appropriate page from the array. So I'll have a private menu page returning function called getPage, which will take in the menu page dot page type as the page type to find. So in addition to having that enum here, let me go ahead and give myself a page type. So that way I can reference it from the menu manager and figure out what page this is. So when I get the page, I'm going to return pages.first or default and find the page where page.pageType equals the page type that I have passed in here. In open save page, what I'm going to look for is the save and load page. So var page equals get page, and I'm going to pass in the menu page dot page type dot save and load. I'll pass that in for load as well. And for config, I'm going to reference the config page, and for help, I'm going to reference the help page. And provided that I've actually got a page, if page equals null, then we're going to return, because we shouldn't be doing anything with nothing. But if we do have the page, then page.open. Now maybe I want to know which page is open. So I can go ahead and make a little cache here, and whatever my last page was, if I have a page that's already open, I'll go ahead and close that page. So I'm going to make a private menu page active page equal to null. And we'll just say if active page is not equal to null and active page is not equal to page, then active page dot close. Then page dot open and active page equals page. And since this is basically the same logic that's going to be repeated for all of the rest of these pages, I'll extract this out and put it into a different function. So we'll make private void open page, and then menu page page, and just paste that in here. So then for open save page, I'm going to say open page and pass in the page. And for all of these, that's basically what I can just do here. So paste it in for config, and paste in for help. That will allow me to link these buttons up. That will allow me to link the buttons up down here with the menu panel manager. So let's go ahead and make the manager. I'm going to right click the managers and make the vn menu page manager and drag in the vn menu manager script. Now the root is going to be the root directly under menus, which controls all of the panels individually. And then I'm going to add 3 panel references, but I need to add them to each of these pages here inside of the menus. So for save and load, config, and help, I'm going to add a new menu. So this menu page is the base type. So I'm going to create a new script, which will be the save and load menu. Then I'm going to create a new page for the config menu. And I don't really need a new one for the help menu because that's just static text. Although maybe we could make that dynamic and have it different depending on what sort of platform this is running on. But I'm not going to focus on that right now. I'm just going to work on the save and load and config menu. So save and load menu is going to have the save and load menu script. Config is going to have the config menu. And help is just going to have the base menu page. Now I need to make sure that both save and load and config are both inheriting from the menu page base class. And that means I can finish setup here. So save and load is set to save and load, and I'll drag in the content for the animator. Config should be set to the config page, and I'll drag in the content as its animator. And then help will just be the help page with content as its animator. And the VN menu page animator is going to take in the save and load menu, the config, and just the rest of the menus there. So now it's got a reference to everything it needs. And so what I should be able to do is come into the canvas main under layers, player interaction, panel, where all of these buttons are located, and use save, load, and config, and then add a new onClick function, which is going to reference the VN menu page manager, and then call the respective open function. So save is going to call VN menu manager open save page. Load is going to call VN manager open load page, and config is going to call VN manager open config page. Now by just clicking these buttons, we should be able to bring them up on screen. But we also need to make sure that the canvasroot controller is showing up as well. So I'm going to make a boolean here. Private bool is open equals false. And so when we open this page, let's go ahead and check. Let's make sure that our main menu is actually open. So if not is open, then I want to make sure that I open this main panel. So private void open root, and then private void close root. So if not is open root. And what root is going to do is say root cg dot show, right? Yeah, show. And then is open is going to equal true. Now, if we close the root, then we'll say root cg dot close or hide, and is open equals false. For right now, we're not doing anything with close root just yet, but we should have open root work for us. Now, we've also got some navigation buttons inside of our overlay as well, don't we? Inside of our navigation bar, let me just go ahead and change up the alpha. We got config, save, load, home, help, quit here, and return. So actually, return would be the close button that we'd be looking for. So let me go ahead to the navigation bar, and for each one of these, I'm going to add an onClick function. So for return, I'm going to reference the menu page, and I'm going to say menu page. That was actually private, so I will make this public. Close root, and maybe that'll be public as well. Okay, so for return, I'm going to say VN menu manager close root, because we're going back to the game. Now config, save, load, and help, I'm going to go ahead and select VN menu page manager. And for config, we'll go ahead and say open config. Save, we'll go open save page. Where's that? Right there. Load, you know the drill. Open load, and help. Let's go to open help page. Okay, so we should see this work for us. I'll go ahead and take the root right back down to 0, so I'm back with just the main page, and let's try it out. We should be able to navigate through the different menus. So if I choose to go to the save menu, there we go, save menu comes up. And now if I press config, actually it's not interactable. Yeah, so when we open the root, I also need to say root cg show, showing. I don't think this is handling anything but the alpha. Oh, set interactable state. I do have a function that does that. So back to the VN menu manager, I'll say root cg.set interactable state to true. And the same thing for close, but I'm going to set it to false. There we are. And let's give this another go. Open up save menu, and now my buttons are usable. So config takes us to the config menu. Second thought, I don't like the orange outline to those buttons, because when they fade out, you still see that and it looks kind of nasty. But we can see that things are fading in. So config and the help menu, Yeah, it looks pretty well. Return, okay, and we go right back. Cool. Config, return, load. All right. Looking pretty decent. So that's going to do it for this video. We got our menus set up and we have them where we can call them up on screen. So in the next video, how about we make our save menu work, and let's go ahead and save our files to whatever slots we want to and finish up that save and load system. Hello everyone, let's get our save and load menu working. So we can already save our progress to a single file because we're only saving it to the first slot. But this save and load menu presents us the opportunity to save to one of many different kinds. So let's go ahead and code out our save and load menu and get this thing working. So let's go to our save and load menu here. Down in our pages, let's grab save and load menu and just open up that script. So the first thing that we want to know is how many files are we allowed to save? So let's define that right now. Let's say private int or constant int max files is equal to the common number of 99. Let's go with 99 save files. And next, we know that we can both call save and load as two different types from the same menu, so let's define a menu function. So let's go ahead and say that we're going to save or load our progress. So depending on which button we select, we're going to use a different menu function. So let's say public enum menu function is equal to either save or load. And this will show a different item for our menus and our save files, depending on what state this menu is loaded in. So I'll go ahead and say private menu function is equal to menu function.save as a default. Next, we've got 6 different save menu buttons, don't we? We've got different save slots, and we want to be able to reference each one of them so we can set the preview picture and the buttons and the text to whatever should be available for that slot, depending on if there's a file saved there or not. Now, there might be quite a bit of information in there, so instead of putting that in this class, we'll segregate that into a different class. So I'm going to create a new script called saveloadslot. The save and load slot will be attached to the objects, so I'll leave mono behavior on there. But I will remove start and update since we don't need those, and we'll go ahead and activate or assign a certain number of variables. So we want the very root of this game object. So public game object root. That way we can enable or disable this depending on if we have an available slot ready. So let's say we end off at 99 or 97 or so. We won't necessarily be using the last 2 slots because our max file size is, say, 97, whatever your number is. So those last 2 would need to be disabled, and we can do that by hiding the root. And they can be enabled on different pages and vice versa. Now, we want the preview image as well. That's done with a raw image. So I need public raw image using the Unity Engine UI namespace, and this will be the preview image. Next, I want the title text, which shows the progress and the timestamp. So public text mesh pro UGUI using the TM Pro namespace called title text. And then the different buttons. So public button, delete button, public button. This will be the save button. Then public button load button, and public, I think that was it. I think those are the only 3 buttons I've got. Now for this slot, we wanted to know what its slot number is. That way if we choose to save, then we're going to save based off of the right number according to this item. So we'll go ahead and say public int file number equals 0. Now let's link up all the save slots in our save and load menu. So public save and load slot array, and we'll do save slots. So our save and load menu is now expecting save slots, which we have a total number of 6. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do this only for the first slot, and I'll just duplicate it to get that on the rest of them. So I'm going to add the save and load slot to this object. After making sure I've saved it, we've now got the references ready. So save slot is going to be the root of itself. And the preview image will go right here. Our description is the title text. And then of course we've got the buttons for delete and load and save. And then I'll go ahead and delete the other two save slots and just duplicate it. Then duplicate the 3 in the right column, duplicate the first one, drag it in the right column, and duplicate twice. And let me go ahead and child force expand height to false. There we go. Make sure I'm matching those up with each other. Okay, so now we've got the 6 save slots. So save and load menu, slot 1 is going to be on the left column, and slot 2, I'll just make my way down. The order of these is important because the first one is obviously going to be element 0 and the last is going to be element 5. So that would be slot 6 and this would be slot 1. And as we have files, they're going to appear in this order. So if you want your files appearing like this, left to right, and working your way down, then you want to stagger your assignments here. So you do slot 1 and then slot 2, or save slot, then save slot 2, then save slot 1, and then so on and so forth. Just stagger them so that way they'll appear in the right spot. But I want mine to proceed down and then to the next column. Okay, so for our menu pages, I'm going to remove start and update as well. And we established the basic open and close functions in the previous episode. So whenever our menu page opens, it's going to cause the animator to trigger it to reveal itself. Now, for the save and load menu, we also want on the first open for it to go ahead and read the first 6 files, or whatever page it's on, read the files and populate all of the save slots. That way they're not empty when we first load this up. So let's go ahead and override the open function and make sure that we also call base.open. That way we get the animator playing its animation as well to reveal this thing. But in addition to that, we want to make sure that we load up all of the files that have been saved for the particular page that we are on. So to keep track of that, let's go ahead and make a private integer current page equals 1. So we're on the first page, which would be the first 6 files that we could possibly save to. And we need to make sure that we load all the files. And we need to make sure that we only do this if we have not already initialized this page. So let's go ahead and make another private bool initialized, or I'll go ahead and say I'll make this loaded files for first time equals false. Okay. So let's go ahead and check and see if we need to display these files and read them from the disk. So if not loaded files for first time, then we need to do that. So let's make a function, a private void called populate save slots from page, or for page, whatever. I guess it doesn't really matter, but save slots for page, and then we'll take an integer for the page number that we're going to reference to read all of the save files. So page number is actually just a multiplier for the save slots. So if we're on page 1, then we're reading slots 1 through 6. If we're on page 2, we're reading slots 7 through 12, and so on and so forth. That's basically how we're going to read the files from disk as we accumulate more and more. So we define what page we have, and then we know what files we need to load. So if we have not loaded files for the first time, then let's populate save slots for page, and let's reference current page, which will be defaulted to 1. So when we get this, we need to know where we need to look for these things. So let's go ahead and define this above. So private string save path equals file paths, which we defined in a previous episode, dot game saves. And that is our runtime path and save files. This is where they will all be saved at. So game saves is going to be where we reference all of our files to load. So now let's figure out what our starting file is going to be. Int starting file is going to equal, let's check out our page. First off, we need to know how many save slots there are per page. So since we have this save slots array, we can get it pretty easily from that, just by referencing a private integer slots per page to equal save slots.length. And so we can look at this. We can say current page -1, and we're going to multiply that by our slots per page, and then just add 1 to that number. For instance, if we are on page 1, then we're going to set 0 multiplied by our slots per page, 6, that would be 0, add 1, we start at the file number 1. If we're on page 2, 2 minus 1 is 1 multiplied by 6, so slot 6 plus 1, we start at slot 7, because we have slots 1 through 6 showing on the first page. So there's our math formula for getting our starting file, and now how about the ending file? Let's go int ending file equals our starting file plus slots per page, and we just need to -1. So let's say we were on page 2, our starting file would be 7, then 7 plus 6 would be 13, but we only show 7 through 12 because that's all that fits on the screen, so we just subtract, and that evens out our number. Now let's do a basic for loop to go through each slot in our page as an integer, so we can use that number and get the current slot that we're trying to populate. So let's say that int file num equals starting file plus I. This is the file that we're going to load. And let's get the save slot. So save and load slot equals the slot at that number. This is why the order of those things in the array mattered so much. Now, let's only show the slot if we are within the max save files permitted. So if file num is less than our max files, then we'll show it. Otherwise, else, we're going to go ahead and say that slot.root.setActiveFalse. So if we can show it, if it's not above the max files that we can save, then we'll go ahead and reveal that slot, and we will set the information that we need. So the save path for this thing is going to be using the save path of the VN game saves plus the file number that we have loaded here. If we were to look at our game save, the VN game save, we can see file path is the file path game saves plus the slot number plus the file type. So I'm going to copy this line and take it to our save and load menu, and I'll say that string file path equals that value, but I need to replace slot number with file number, and I need to replace file type with vngamesave.filetype. So in our save and load slot, since we have these buttons to save and load, when we have loaded this information, let's also store the information that we found into the slot, such as the file number, the file path where something needs to be saved, anything else we might need. So we got our file number in this save and load slot, which we can assign here. So if we go back to our save and load menu, I'll go ahead and say that slot.filenumber equals file num. Now maybe we can also set the path of this thing. So slot, I may make this hide in inspector, and then I'll also hide in inspector the public string file path. And then I'll say slot.filePath equals file path. And now we have the number of this slot, and we have the file that it loads. Now after we've gathered this information, that's all just in the background. we still need to apply the visuals for this thing, such as setting the right buttons to be visible. So if there's no file, we obviously can't delete it, so we would want to hide the delete button. And if we're trying to save rather than load, we want the save button visible, but not the load button. So we'll go ahead and call a function on our save and load slot to populate its details. So let's make that real quick. Let's make a public void called populate details. And then we're going to call that saying slot.populate details. In order to know what it is that we're doing, we need to know what kind of function it is that we're using this for. So if we open this as, say, the save panel, then we want to make sure that we tell the slot that we are trying to save something to this slot so we can show the right information. And if we're trying to load. So our populate details needs to take in the menu function of the save and load menu. So we'll have the save and load menu dot menu function, and that will determine what happens in here. So in populate details, we'll do the menu function as what we're passing in, so that way it knows whether we're trying to save or load. But that just means that when we open this panel, we need to tell the save and load menu what it is we're trying to do. So I'm going to make this public. And when we go to the VM menu manager, if we open the save page, then we want to make sure that the save and load menu is told that it is trying to save or it's trying to load. Now we've got a reference to its content, but not the actual object. But I know that the save and load panel is just the parent of the page. Now we don't have access to the actual save and load panel here, but we do have access to the menu page. And I know that the save and load panel is just the parent of that animator that it's using. So I'll go ahead and say that var slm equals page.enum, which is not public. So menu page, and since I now need it that way, I'm going to say public animator enum, come back to manager, enum.get component in parent of the type save and load menu. And then I can say slm.menu function equals menu function.save. And if I'm trying to load it instead, then I will set it to load. And now that means when we populate these files, then it's automatically going to tell the slot whether it's trying to save or load from it. So in the slot, let's check it out. Let's go ahead and see if this file that we have, first of all, if it exists. So let's go ahead and check. If file dot exists, which I need the using system.io namespace. If file exists, the file path, then we'll go ahead and try to load the information. And we'll do so by passing instruction to this next command, which will be a private void populate details from file. And we'll take in the function, so save and load menu function. As well as the vn game save file that we're pulling the information from. So let's get the file. vn game save file equals vn game save.load file path, and let's make sure activate on load is set to false so we only get the file, and that's it. And then we'll go ahead and say that populate details from file will pass in the function that we've received, as well as the file that has been loaded. Otherwise, we're going to populate with details from file, but we're going to pass in, pass in nothing as the file, and essentially tell this that this is an empty slot, and we can fill it with the right information. Now, we can do one of two things. We can either load from a file, or we can load nothing, which is essentially an empty file. So let's check that first of all. Let's check if file is not equal to null. Actually, it'll be much quicker if we say if file equals null and do the check with the least amount of data that we need to work with first. And else, then we'll go ahead and load the file. So if file equals null, then we're going to go ahead and just set some default data for this. How about we go ahead and set the text to say that this is an empty slot? So we can access the title text and say title text.text equals something like empty file. And we know we can't delete it if there is no file here, so delete button dot set dot game object dot set active false. And we also know that we can't load it, so we will say load button dot game object dot set active false. Now we can save it only if we have our function set to save on the save and load menu. If it's set to load, we shouldn't be able to save it at all, so we can't do anything there. So function equals save only if we are trying to save from this menu will the save button be visible. Next, we also have the preview image. Now we'll need to assign that to some sort of default value. And maybe we can assign that from our save and load menu. So in our save and load menu, I will also make a public texture, and this will be the empty file image. And if I'm going to reference that in our save slot, I need a reference to the save and load menu. So I will have a public static save and load menu instance, which will have get private set, and inside of a new awake function, we'll go ahead and say that instance equals this. And so save and load slot, the preview image dot texture will equal the save and load menu dot instance dot empty file image. And there we go. That's what happens if we have no file at all. Now, I have just spotted a crucial error here in that file num is starting at 1, which makes sense for our files, but we have to keep in mind when we're accessing the save slots, we're doing it by index. So file num needs to be subtracted by. Actually, no, it needs to be I. We don't even need to reference file num in there because that could be anything higher than 1. So we just reference the current index we're looking at, and that's the slot we're going to use. And so now, if I come to my save and load menu, I have this empty file variable here, and I can just drag in the new game image right there, and we should be able to give this a play and check out and see if it's working. All that should happen is we should populate all of the saves with, if we actually, let me look at this real quick. Preview image, I'm going to take all these preview images. I'm going to take all the preview images, and right now I'm just going to take these and set them to the choice button pictures. So they should change to the preview image set in my save and load menu. Also, I'm going to take the description text and I'm going to change that to something stupid. And this should change to empty file for all of the save items. So let me go ahead and try to open up save. And there we go. We do get empty file, and we get the new game image for every single one of them. Since they're all empty, I have the save button here. If I try to hit load, then it brings the menu up, but I can't load anything, which is exactly what we want because they're all empty. The only thing we don't have working is this navigation menu. So, and a little numbering system for these items. So maybe we'll go index followed by empty file. That way we can see what slot number these things are. In order to do that, when we set our title text, let me just go ahead and inject the actual number here. So slot or file number is going to go first, followed by empty file. And so then if we go to bring up the menu now, we will get the slot number at the different items. So let's get these file page navigation working. We'll come back to setting the details for a saved file in a minute, once we actually implement the saving logic. Right now, let's go ahead and implement the logic on our save and load menu to allow us to go through the different pages and see all of our files. In order to do this, we're going to make a new script which is going to be just for our navigation bar. So this will be save and load page navigation bar. Okay, so this save and load navigation bar is going to tell our save and load menu basically what page it's on. And we'll be able to navigate through it, and we're going to handle this dynamically, so depending on what our max files is, it's going to automatically create as many buttons as we need. So let's go ahead and start with a link to our save and load menu. So let's serialize a private field for our save and load menu, and we'll just call that the menu. Now, I'm going to make a private bool called initialized, which is just going to be false right now. When we initially start this thing up, it's going to initialize itself and determine how many pages should be available based off of the max files that we have. So let's make some buttons, or let's link the buttons that we have to this script, such as our previous and next, as well as the page buttons. So we'll once again make serialize field private. We need a game object for the button prefab. This is going to be for the different pages that we can jump to. And we'll go ahead and make another one, which will be the previous button, and another one, which will be the next button. And, okay. And we should really only use the next and back buttons if we have more pages than we will allow on our navigation bar, because there's no point to going next when you can just hit the page buttons, right? But if you have pages that are outside of the range, then the next button can carry you as far as you want to go. So let's define a private integer that's going to tell us what the maximum amount of navigation buttons there will be is. So we'll make a private constant int max buttons, and I'll set that to, maybe we'll do 5. 5 is a demo. Okay, and let's go ahead and see what our selected page is. This will be public, so our save menu can access it. A public int selected page get private set is going to equal 1. Next, let's see how many pages there are that are actually being offered to us. Private int max pages. By default, we'll set it at 0. Okay, so when we start, we want to go ahead and initialize the menu. So let's make a private void, if I can get that. Private void initialize menu. I don't like those auto-suggested functions and things that Visual Studio gives you sometimes. I really need to look and see how to turn those off. But when we start, let's go ahead and initialize the menu. So when we initialize the menu, then we'll go ahead and say that initialized equals true. But if we've already initialized, so if initialized, then we're just going to return and do nothing. Otherwise, initialized is true, and let's figure out, based off of the max files that we can have, how many slots or pages that we should be using for this navigation menu. So max pages equals, we'll say mathf.ceil. This is basically going to keep us from having a max pages count of 0. And we're going to use our max save files that are allowed in the system divided by how many save slots we have per screen. That will give us how many pages that we should have at any one time. But those are both integers on our menu, so let's convert it to a float. Float menu.max. It's got to be, I think I have that as, yeah, max files is private. So I'll make that public. And we'll go ahead and say that if I'm using that as a constant, then I'm going to reference the save and load menu dot max files. And I'm also going to want to know how many slots we have per page, so that's going to be public as well. So we'll get save and load menu max files divided by menu dot slots per page. and that would give us the total number of pages that we should have to display all of the slots available to us. So let's get our page button limit, just in case there are more pages than we would like to display, and we'll use the next and back button to go further. So int page button limit equals, so the page button is going to see if our maximum buttons is less than our maximum pages, and if it is, then we're just going to go with the max button count. Otherwise, we're going to go with however many pages we found. So let's go ahead and check if max buttons is less than the however many pages we should have here, then we're just going to limit it to the max buttons, otherwise to however many pages we need. Next, let's iterate through every page that we need to run through, starting at 1, so that way we can assign the proper page number to our buttons. That button is going to come from instantiating our button prefab object on the whatever its parent will be, which is the little column that it would be in, the navigation bar. And now that thing is going to be deactivated at start, so let's go ahead and make sure that's deactivated in Unity. And all that's going to be is page 1, really, here. So that's going to be my prefab, but I'm going to have it deactivated right now, so it won't even be there. So when we duplicate it and instantiate it, the first thing we want to do is make it active. So set active true. And then we need to get the button. So button, I need the Unity Engine UI namespace. So using Unity Engine .ui namespace, and now I can use button. So button equals ob.getComponent button. Okay, and now let's go ahead and just set the name of this thing so we see it in the inspector for what it is. So ob.name is going to equal i.toString. So that way it's just named whatever page number it is. And let's make sure that its text shows that page number. So text mesh pro UGUI txt for text is going to equal button.getComponent in children, so we can find that text mesh pro object and then set the txt.text to equal I to string. So this will show up the page number for the button on our navigation menu. And we'll just want to assign an action to the button that will make sure that when we click it, we tell the save and load menu to load all the files associated with that page. So let's make a function that will handle that for each button. Let's go ahead and make a private, actually no, it can be private. So private void select save file page. And we'll pass in an integer for the page number that is selected. This will be given by the button that we click. And so selected page on this navigation page will be the page number, and then we just want to tell our menu to populate, which that's going to be private. So let's make sure populate save slots for page is public. That way we have access to it and we can get it to load all the files and apply all the details to every slot. So menu.populate save slots for that page number that we've selected. So for our button, to add the event that's going to be triggered when we click it, we can say ob, which is our button. Actually, no, it needs to be button.onClick.addListener. And we're going to add a expression, which is going to call this function. So we'll have our little lambda expression and tell it to call select save file page. And we're going to select the index here. However, there is a little problem if we go to run this like it is. Even though we're passing in the integer, we're passing in the variable, and that's declared in this for loop. So as we loop through and we do this for each button, I is incrementing, and you wouldn't think it, but when we add the listener here, every time we make this loop, I is going to increment, and it's going to increment the value that's already been assigned to the function that's going to be called on the button. So in the end, they're all going to select the same file page, which would be the last one. So to avoid that problem, we need to make a little index which will prevent that closure problem. So let's make an integer called the closure index, which will prevent it from using the incrementing value of the loop. So that's just going to equal I. So we have a brand new variable, a brand new memory space, and all we do is reference that. Otherwise, we will run into an issue. Okay, so we've got all those page buttons made, but what happens if we have more pages than we have been allowed to instantiate based off of our page button limit? Then we need to make sure that our page button, previous buttons are activated. So let's go ahead and say that previous button dot set active, and we're going to set it to active if our page button limit is less than max pages. If that's true, then we know we've got more pages than we have buttons, so we need to add the previous button. And we'll say next button will be the same. So we can assign those to the page buttons, and that's exactly what's happening when we add it to onClick. But for our onNext and our previous button, we need to assign a different value here. So let's go ahead and make two new functions. This is going to be a public void called toNextPage, and a new public void toPreviousPage. So if we're going to the next page, we need to make sure that we can actually advance. So if selected page is less than our max pages, then we'll go ahead and select save file page, which will be our current page plus 1, and we'll just proceed to the next one. Whereas if we're going back, then we need to check if selected page is greater than 1, since we're running everything based off of 1 here. That is the way we start our loop. Everything is going to be referenced based off of 1 and not 0, so that's what we're looking for here. And we're just going to use selected page minus 1. Okay, and we can link that to our next and previous buttons. We could either do that in initialization, or we could do that inside of the Unity editor. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that in the Unity editor. And I'll do that by selecting back and forward and go down to onClick. Select, I need to add my page navigation menu, so save and load menu right here, page navigation bar. And that's going to have the save and load menu as the menu. The button prefab will be the page button, which is hidden right now. Back will be the previous button, and forward will be the next button. Now, back and forward are going to reference the navigation menu, and back is going to say that we are to previous page, and forward will be to next page. So I'll go ahead and set my root to be invisible again, and launch this, and let's see it. So if I open up the save menu now, okay, so, well, my arrows need to change position, so I just need to sandwich the pages between those two. But we can still test the functionality. So we've got 1 through 6 on screen. Let's go to page 2. That's giving nothing. So I think because I didn't change the page inside of the actual save menu. So yeah, the save and load menu is receiving the page number, but it's not taking that into account. So let's just go ahead and update the save and load menu by saying current page equals page number. And then we should load the right files. Let's go ahead and check this. So 1 and then 2, good. That takes us to 7 through 12, and then 13 to 18 on page 3, page 4, 19, 24, 5, 25 to 30, but we should be able to go to 95, so we can hit the next button, and indeed we can keep on going until we reach 98. So looks like we need to go one increment further. And that just means that our file num needs to be less than or equal to the max files. And with that, because it's looking for the file number and not the file index, we go ahead and we see the 99th file. Now, for fixing forward, I guess after we create all the pages, we'll just set the sibling index of forward to be the last child in the list. That way, it's at the very end. And we can do that pretty easily by saying next button.transform.set as last sibling. and then it'll be at the very end of the list, and it'll render at the tail. Okay, let's try it. Save menu. There we go, and it's there at the very end. So, cool. We've got those files working. Now, let's go ahead and try to save a file. Let's make a function that can be called for each one of the buttons on our save and load slot. So public void delete, then public void load. Again, an auto-generated method from Visual Studio. So load, and then public void save. So when we go to save, we're going to want to reference the active VN game save that's currently open. So we can do that by saying var active save equals vn game save dot active file. Now, active file could be null. In any normal situation, when we load the VN, it's automatically going to load the VN game save from file, or it's going to create a new one. So we don't have to worry about this right now, because this shouldn't be null. We should always have some sort of active file. As a matter of fact, if we come to our VN manager script, which will handle the VN active game save loading, when we exit the main menu, we're actually going to save whatever file it is that we've been working, that we decide to load, to a particular file or to a variable, and we'll go ahead and load it here. So this will be the prime spot where we'll go ahead and do that. For right now, since we're not loading anything from the main menu, we're just going to create a new VN game save whenever we start a new scene. So vn game save dot active file equals new vn game save. So if we go to click the save button, no matter what, we're going to have an active file, whether it's one that we've loaded or one that was automatically created. Okay, so we have our active save file. Now let's go ahead and make sure that we're on the same slot. So active save dot slot number equals file number here. So file number is the slot number, just to be clear there. So if we're on slot 1, this is going to be file 1, basically. So we'll create that, and then we'll just go ahead and simply save the file. So vn or active save dot save. And then we're just going to want to make sure that after we save it, we update the information on this save slot. So we'll go ahead and populate details, and actually I'm going to go ahead and populate details from file. And we'll go ahead and take in the function as whatever it is that we're running. It should be save, but I'm going to go ahead and look back at our menu. So save and load menu. And I will reference the instance dot menu function. So whatever that is, which it should be save if we're saving the file, but just in case. We'll reference that, and then we'll just reference the active save as what it is that we're trying to load. Okay, so we'll get all the updated details, and we'll update our slot after we save it. Now, if we load, then we're going to want to grab the game save from the file. We'll read it based off of the slot number, and we'll load it into the scene. And so when we load, we've already got the file path that is on this this slot. So we can just load it directly from that. So let's try to do that. Let's go and say that vn game save save or file equals vn game save dot load, and we're going to load it from the file path, and we're going to go ahead and activate it after we've loaded it. And then maybe we will tell the panel to close because we've already opened it. So save and load menu dot instance dot close. And if we've done that, then let's go ahead and make sure that everything has closed. So in our menu page, when we tell a menu to close, we'll also add a boolean called close all menus. and that's going to equal false off the bat. So when we close by default, we're only closing the main panel. But in such a case as when we load a file, we can tell this panel to close as well as all of the other ones and exit the menus entirely, taking us back to the visual novel. So let's go ahead and check. If close all menus, then we need to access the VN menu manager. So I'm going to go ahead and make this have an instance as well. So public static VN manager instance and void awake instance equals this. So save and load slot. Actually menu page. If close all menus, then VN menu manager dot instance dot close. And so when we save and load, we'll tell the save and load menu to close, and we'll say close all menus is true. So that way we exit the save and load menu and go right back to the visual novel immediately after we've loaded the file. So let's get back to saving. How do we know if we've actually saved it? We're going to write it to file, but then we need to populate the details from file. And right now, only if our file is null, we're doing something. So at this point, we can have a valid file. So we can populate all of our data with the VN game save information. So there's some information that we're going to want in order to give our title text the right info to display. So title text dot text, first of all, is going to equal, it's going to have our file number there. So file number followed by the dot, and then whatever the descriptive text is. So we need some information. Let's go right back to our VN game save and just give ourselves a little bit more information that we can display to differentiate this from any other file. So I'm going to make a public string timestamp, and this will be the timestamp that's saved whenever we save this file, and we'll show that to know when we last saved this game. So when we save, we're going to have to get that information. So when we save, let's also go ahead and say that timestamp equals datetime dot now dot toString. But we're going to want to format this. So inside of quotes, we should get a listing of different things that we can use. So we're going to customize this a little bit, and we're going to say year using 2 digits. We're going to follow it by a dash and the month, then another dash, and the day. So the day of the month. And then I think we're going to, maybe we can add the hours and minute and second to it as well, if we want to go that deep with it, which would make sense. So we'll go hour, and then minute, and the seconds as well. We don't need to worry about any milliseconds. This will be good enough. So let's go ahead and add that as our timestamp, and then that's available to us. So in our save and load slot, we can say file number, and then we can reference the file.timestamp, and it'll show us when we last saved this file. So let me get the delete button and the save button and all that good stuff. And delete button will be true, because if we have a file, we can delete it if we so choose. Load button will be active if our function equals the save and load menu dot load. Otherwise, it will not be there. And then save is going to be active. Again, we'll leave that the way it is, only if we're on the save menu. Now, the preview image, this is where our screenshot would come in, which we don't have right now. So instead, we're just going to set it to null. So it's going to become a blank, empty square. But that'll be enough to tell us when we've saved a file. So how about we try it now? Let's come back into our Unity project. And under the root of the menus, I'm just going to enable that so I can see what I'm doing. And let me go ahead to my save slots. So the first save slot is the only one I'm going to be working with right now. I'm going to take in my options, and I'm going to click save, and so all of them, add a new event, and add it to my saveslot function. And then delete is going to access saveslot.delete. Load will be saveslot.load. And save will be saveslot.save. And because I don't want to make those links all the time, for the rest of these, I'm going to delete them and delete the other three, and then just duplicate the save slots again, take it to the right column, duplicate, and then relink them in the save and load menu. So save slot 1, and then 2, then 3, 4, and 5. Be a little quicker than trying to make the links for all of those individually. But that should be enough. Let's try to play it and save a game. Oop, I forgot my root needs to be inactive. And let's go ahead and try to save. So here we are. Let me go ahead and click the save menu and save. There we go. Okay, so not only do we get the message in the console, save data to app data save files 1.vns, we also get it telling us that we do have a save file there. We have the delete button and the save button where we can override it. So I could override this thing, and let me go ahead and see. Yeah, okay, so yeah, it'll let me override it, and then I get the seconds updating. Okay, cool, so let's try number 5, save, boom. And now save data to save files 5. Now let me go all the way out to, I'm gonna go to 98, and I'm gonna save right there, boom. Saved to files 98. Now let's exit out and come back in, and it should be able to load all of them back in. Again, my root needs to be disabled, and load. Okay, there we go. So 1 is there with its timestamp, and 5 is there. Let me go all the way to the end, and there we go. File 98 is there as well. Cool. Okay, so that works. Let's go ahead and try to delete the files. A good practice would be to put in a UI confirmation menu and ask if you're sure if you want to delete or overwrite a file. We're not focusing on that right now. That may be something we add in the future, but let's just go ahead and say, if we click the delete button, we're absolutely sure we want this thing gone. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that and say file.delete file path. And then we'll go ahead and populate details with our save and load menu, whatever the function is. So copy and paste. And it should clear out our file. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to open up the load menu, and I'm going to delete file 5. Boom, it's gone. Let me exit out, come back in. That file should be gone completely. So it shouldn't reappear if it was deleted. So load, good. 5 is showing up as empty. And yeah, if I go to project and look in my assets, app data, save files, 5 is listed there, but it's because we haven't refreshed. We refresh and 5 is gone. And we only have 1 and 98. So let me go all the way to the end and delete 98. And then refresh, 98's gone. All right, perfect. And we can go all the way back to 1, and we're looking good. Now, in order to get the graphics for the preview panel, we need to take a screenshot whenever we save the game, so we know exactly what we were looking at and what was on screen. That makes it easier to distinguish the files. So this should be pretty quick. Let's go ahead and create one new script for that. And we'll call this the screenshot master. So this screenshot master is going to allow us to both capture and save screenshots to file. And we'll be able to do it at different resolutions so we can save on memory, which is incredibly important for the visual novel here. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a way where we can capture the screenshot. So we want to be able to capture this screenshot off of a particular camera, which is only our main camera. That way, when we have our overlay set up and it's visible, we're not going to capture that in the screenshot. We're only going to capture what's actually being shown in the visual novel. So we'll need to provide a camera for that. And just in case we use this for like anything else and we don't provide a camera necessarily, we'll just use the main camera. So let's make two functions. Public static. If we capture a screenshot, we want to return the screenshot though, so that way we can either immediately apply it to something or we can manually save it to file. So we'll return a texture 2D called capture screenshot, and we're going to capture it at a certain width and a certain height. And for scaling it, either up or down, upscaling or downscaling it, for the visual novel will be downscaling, we're going to specify a value to supersize it by. So int supersize will by default equal 1. Okay, and a string for the file path will equal nothing right off the bat, because we'll just default it if we don't provide it anything. So what this is going to do is it's going to actually send us to a new function, which will also take in a camera for whatever's going to be capturing the screenshot. So if we specify this, then we're just going to capture the screenshot, pass in our width, height, supersize, and the file path, as well as camera.main, and just use the main camera to capture the screenshot. So in any other case, we're passing in the whatever camera we're trying to use. So let's go ahead and figure out our width and our height here. So if supersize is not equal to 1, meaning we are not capturing the default size, then let's recalculate the width. The width is going to equal math f.round to int, and we're going to get width times the supersize. And we'll go ahead and duplicate the height as well. Height is mathf, height times supersize. Now, in order for us to capture this screenshot, we're going to take the camera output and we're going to temporarily render it to a render texture. So let's create the render texture. Render texture rt equals render texture, and we're going to create a temporary one. So we'll use the built-in function get temporary, and we're going to create it with the width that we're using, the height that we're using, and also the depth buffer, which we'll just go with 32. So then we just need to apply the camera's target texture to the render texture. That way it outputs to that texture. So cam.target texture, cam target texture equals RT. And now we need to create the screenshot texture. So let's make our texture 2D, and we'll call this screenshot. This is going to equal a new texture 2D, and we need to size it according to the output of the render texture, which will be our width and our height, and whatever kind of texture format we're going to be using. So we could use alpha as well as red, green, blue. So we will go with the texture format. Maybe you don't want to use transparency, in which case you can forego ARGB and just go RGB. But we'll go texture format dot, I'm going to use ARGB 32. And in addition to that, the bitmaps, we are just going to set that to false. So we get our screenshot, and then to make sure that it goes ahead and it renders to that texture, we will call the camera.render. And we'll force it to render this frame, and that will now be applied to our render texture. So we'll go ahead and take care of this. Okay, and now let's set the active render texture to the temporary render texture that we've created. This means that any subsequent graphic commands are just going to target this texture that we're using. So we'll say render texture dot active equals RT, the one that we've created. Okay, and now we're going to have to write the data of the camera to the texture and scale it to the resolution that we have defined. So we'll reference screenshot, the texture that we're creating here. This is what's going to be returned in the function and what we will really write to file. So screenshot.readPixels. we're essentially going to read the pixels from the active render texture into this screenshot texture that we have. So we read the pixels, and we need to do it inside of a rect, which we define as 0, 0, and then specify our width and height. So width and height, and then destination X. We don't need to worry about either of these because we're not doing, we're only messing with the width and the height. Okay, so at this point we've captured everything that we need, so we can clear out the camera's target texture and make sure that it's actually going to start picking up data again and showing it to the screen. So cam.target texture equals null, and we'll also say render texture dot active equals null because we're done with that. And then let's go ahead and free up the resources by releasing the render texture that we created. So render texture dot release temporary, since we created just a temporary one with RT. And now we can go ahead and return the screenshot that captured all the pixels. Now, if we have a file path here, we can go ahead and take this screenshot and we can save it to file as well. In order for us to do that, let's make another function that will allow us to do that. So public static void save screenshot to file. And so we're going to take in a texture 2D as the screenshot and a string for the file path and a string for the file type, which by default is just going to equal .png. So when we get this, we need to, in order to write this texture, we're just going to convert it into bytes, and then we're going to write all the bytes to whatever file that we have decided to place this in. So let's get a byte array called bytes, and this will equal screenshot.encode to PNG if we're using a PNG, so we could do a switch statement depending on what kind of file type we're using. So maybe I will go ahead and do a public enum image type, and this will just be a PNG, JPEG, and maybe whatever else we might want to use. So instead of a string, I'll use a image type, file type, and this is going to equal image type.png by default. So switch by our file type. So if we are using PNG, let me go ahead and get my byte array right above this, equals a new byte array 0. If we're doing PNG, then bytes equals screenshot.encode to PNG, break, otherwise case JPG, then bytes equals encode to JPEG, and break. And you know what? If, yeah, those are my only two cases. So we'll go ahead and get our bytes. And now we need to get the file. So let's determine the file type based off of the image type we're using. So string file type equal, oh, I forgot that as a parameter, extension equals, let's check if our, actually, I'll go ahead and define that up here so I can get it all in the switch statement. String extension equals nothing right now. So if we're doing PNG, extension equals dot PNG. And if we're doing JPEG, then extension equals dot JPG. Okay, cool. So string file equals file path plus extension. And then we can call system.io.file.write all bytes, and use our file and pass in the bytes. So if our file path equals or is not equal to nothing, then we'll go ahead and say that we will save save screenshot to file, passing in the screenshot and the file path. And I'm just going to save my types as PNG, so I'll leave that as default. Okay, well, that's how we'll capture our screenshots. So let's go back to the save load slot. So when we call this v-in-game-save to save, I want it to automatically save a screenshot as well. So we'll do that right in here. So we're going to reference the screenshot master dot capture screenshot, and we're going to capture it at a kind of a reduced size, so that way it'll still look decent in the save and load menu, but it'll be much smaller, so it's quick to save, quick to load, and doesn't use a lot of memory. So I need a camera. Let me go to my v-in menu manager, and I'm going to go ahead and just specify a camera here. So I will say public camera, main camera, and I'll assign it from the inspector. So when we capture the screenshot, I'm going to get the v-in manager, or is that the menu manager? Yeah, I put that in the menu manager. I meant to put that in the actual v-in manager. So I'll save that and put it in the v-in manager. Okay, and then the game save is going to say v-in manager.instance.main camera, and we're going to get the width as the screen dot width and the screen dot height, and then we're going to scale this down a notch. So I'm going to say 0. Let's go with 0.5 right now. Actually, let's you know what, I can't do that because I made that a float, so or an integer. Let me change that to a float. That'll give us more flexibility than just a regular old integer. So float, supersize, and then v-in-game-save, we'll go ahead and multiply it by 0.5. And our file path is going to be our screenshot path. So our screenshot path already has the file type in it. So screenshot master, when I go to save it, I'll only do that if it doesn't already have an extension to it. So let me go ahead and see. File path equals file path.extension. So I'll change file for file path and just check if not file path dot contains the dot symbol. So if it has an extension, then I don't want to do anything with it. I don't want to change it. I'll just leave it as is. Okay, so to be able to capture these screenshots, let's go to the Visual Novel Manager and set our camera main as the main camera. And with that, we should be in business. Let me go ahead and start this up and try to save an image. And I'll go ahead and save to 2. Okay, we worked. Let me go ahead and refresh. And there we go. Okay, cool. So I can see that 2.jpg was saved. So if I look at that here, we can see, yeah, it sure did save, and it is at a smaller size. We can look down here in the display, and we see it's 512 by 256. Let me go a little further. I'm going to skip ahead. And I'm going to go ahead and save now to file 3. And refresh. And there we go. File 3 got saved with a screenshot. Okay, so when we go to populate the details from this, our preview image is being set to null, but I want it to be the texture that's just been captured. That texture has been saved to file, so we need to load it from file. So in order for us to do that, we're going to have to get the bytes. So we've already got the screenshot path because we've already got the file, and that's just within the file itself. So let's get our byte array for the image data, and that's going to equal, let's load some bytes. Just like we wrote bytes to write the image to file, we're going to read bytes to load it back into the array. So file dot read all bytes, and we'll reference file dot screenshot path. Once we have this data, then we're going to generate the texture as a texture 2D. So let's go ahead and just create our little texture. So our texture 2D will be the screenshot preview, and that's going to equal a new texture 2D, and we'll just specify just any number for these integers there, but we're going to load the image. So now we're going to load it into our texture. So image conversion dot load image, and we're going to load it into our screenshot preview using the data that we've read from the file. And now I can go ahead and say that preview image.texture equals the screenshot preview. And that should show us the texture that we have loaded from file. In addition, when I save this, I'm going to make sure that I just decrease this a little bit more. So I'm going to make a constant up above and say public constant float screenshot downscale amount equals 0.25. So we'll scale it down to 25%. And I'll just replace that with the downscale amount. There. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this now. We're getting to the tail end of it. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and skip all the way, go to the end, skip. All right, great. Now let me go ahead and save. So, if you get an error, could not find file 1.jpg, that's because we made that file before we did the screenshot system. So I'll just go ahead and delete file 1 since that doesn't have a screenshot with it, and then it should go ahead and load up everything that it needs. So let me go ahead and try to hit save again. There we go. So now it brings up the menu, and I'll go ahead and save to slot 1. Boom, there we go. There's our screenshot, loads right up. And so do the other two. So I'll go ahead and save to 5. Nice. Okay, let's go ahead and go a little further. There we go. So now we got the monk in here. I'm going to save over 5. There we go. Looking nice. We'll save over 2. Good. Delete. All nice. Perfect. Now we'll go ahead and exit out, come back in, and of course loading should be just fine. But let's try it. So load, and I want to take it to where we are in the rain. Load. Okay, well, the background didn't load. That's kind of weird. So that issue is because my history states because I was skipping and triggering this termination logic to set the texture, I actually wasn't setting it with the file path, so it was erasing the file path and therefore giving me no background. So I just made sure that whenever I'm skipping and I terminate the transition for a picture or a video, that whenever I set the texture or set the video, I also specify the file path so that way it doesn't overwrite itself. With all of that out of the way, now we can relaunch for the final time and try this loading out. If I load up the scene here, there we go. We can load that, and I'll try to go back to the very beginning, and sure enough, do. Okay. Great. So I think that's enough to end this one off. And in the next episode, we're going to continue and we're going to work on our config menu and get that editing the settings such as our text speed and our volumes and all that other good stuff. So until then, I'll see you guys next time.